Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Um, Today we're going to be looking at the political scene surrounding President Trump's second term.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting stuff.
Absolutely. And early on,
Yeah, it's
too.
just these first few weeks and already seeing some shifts and some changes and some pushback. And we're going to be looking at an article from Crips and Liars called
Okay.
"Things Flipped Against Trump This Week and So Soon."
Interesting title.
Yeah, it's a very provocative title, and the article itself is very interesting. It kind of sets the stage as this initial, like, calm. Everyone kind of thinks they're on the same page with Trump's agenda.
Right. And I think that's key to the whole article is this idea that,
Yeah,
like, setting that baseline of, like, okay, there was a feeling that everything was fine, and then
right.
things changed very quickly.
And then things kind of blew up.
Yeah.
Right. So the article talks about this controversial spending freeze that Trump kind of hits everybody with right away,
Yeah.
and things like Head Start, Meals on Wheels, programs for veterans struggling with suicidal thoughts.
Like, really key things that people rely on.
Yeah, and so it's like, wait a minute. What's going on here? And I think that's one of the things that the article points to as this turning point.
Absolutely. It was the first time that people were seeing the real-world impact of these policies.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, abstract policy debates anymore. It was like, okay, this is affecting people's lives.
Exactly.
And I think that's what really got people's attention.
And the media, too, right? Because the media initially was pretty quiet about some of these things, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, what's
Right.
going on? Like, remember that whole thing with Jake Tapper and Stephen Miller about the Meals on Wheels?
Oh, yeah, that was a turning point, I think, in the media narrative.
Big time. Yeah.
Tapper really grilling Miller about, like,
About, like, the logic behind it,
yeah,
He asked Miller, does anyone believe that an unaccountable career bureaucrat should be able to approve vast sums of money for the projects that they personally agree with? So he was really challenging him on that.
yeah, he wasn't just accepting, like, the talking points. He was really pushing back. And I think that was significant.
I think so, too.
So we kind of have this initial perception of Trump being in sync with the country.
Right.
And then the spending freeze happens. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Maybe not everybody's on board with this.
And then everybody kind of jolts into action.
yeah, and then it's like all of a sudden
Yeah.
the Democrats are like, oh, we got to push back against this. And,
Right.
Chuck Schumer comes out,
Schling.
swinging against this and saying this is, cruel and unnecessary.
Right. And then you had Tim Kaine warning federal workers about that buyout offer,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
questioning whether Trump would actually follow through on the agreements. And that's pretty big, to
Mhm.
question the president's trustworthiness like that.
Yeah, and it shows that the Democrats are like, okay, we got to be more assertive here.
Absolutely.
But then you have this other narrative happening at the same time, right?
Right.
The article mentions this New York Magazine cover story about young Trump supporters
Yeah.
and how they're these cool trendsetters.
Like the in crowd.
Yeah, and that's a powerful image, right?
Right.
If you're a politician and you see this gearing, you might be hesitant to criticize Trump too much because you don't want to alienate those voters.
Right. You don't want to see him out of touch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's this really interesting dynamic where you have this growing pushback against Trump, but then you also have this image of his supporters being very influential.
Yeah. So where does public opinion actually stand?
Yeah, is it really shifting?
Is it just a vocal minority or is this something bigger?
Well, the article mentions this Reuters Ipsos poll
Mm-hmm.
that suggests maybe public opinion isn't as solidly behind Trump as we thought.
Interesting.
They found that a significant portion of the public actually disagrees with some of his key policies.
So is that because of the pushback, or did the Democrats misjudge things from the beginning?
Yeah, it's a chicken or the egg kind of question.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what makes this whole situation so fascinating.
It's like watching the political landscape being reshaped right before our eyes.
Yeah, it's like a real-time political thriller.
Absolutely. And the author of this article seems to be hoping that this new focus on the potential harm of Trump's policies will kind of become the dominant narrative,
Right.
and that will lead to more checks and balances on presidential power.
Okay, so they're hoping this will kind of limit the damage in the long run.
Yeah, exactly.
But that still leaves the question of what about the people who are still firmly in Trump's camp?
Right, because they're still out there.
Yeah, and that's a huge piece of this whole puzzle.
It speaks to a deeper divide in the country.
Yeah, it's not just about disagreeing on policies. It's about something more fundamental.
Absolutely.
This deep dive is getting really deep, and we've barely scratched the surface here.
Yeah, we have.
But before we go any further, I think we need to take a step back and really break down some of these key events, starting with that spending freeze.
Okay, let's do it.
What exactly happened? What were the arguments for and against it? And what does it tell us about the political dynamics at play?
I mean, that spending freeze really did kind of throw everyone for a loop.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It really was. You had cuts to programs that people rely on,
Yeah.
like real tangible stuff.
Yeah, not just theoretical
No,
anymore.
exactly. It was hitting home for a lot of people.
Like that Meals on Wheels program that the article talks about.
Right. Helping seniors who can't get out and get food for themselves.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that either.
No, Head Start was in there.
Uh-huh.
Veterans suicide prevention programs.
Right. It was a lot of stuff.
All kinds of things. And then you had the Trump administration trying to justify it,
Oh, yeah.
saying it was about wasteful spending.
Right, like reining in those unelected bureaucrats.
Exactly. Stephen Miller was the one who really pushed that line.
But wasn't there pushback on that?
Oh, yeah, big time.
Like Jake Tapper really grilled him on that.
He did. During an interview, he asked Miller, "Does anyone believe that an unaccountable career bureaucrat should be able to approve vast sums of money for the projects that they personally agree with?"
It's a good question.
It is. He was really challenging that whole premise.
Yeah, he wasn't letting Miller get away with just like general talking points.
No, he was digging deeper.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you see the media narrative starting to shift.
Right, they're not just accepting what the administration is saying anymore.
Exactly. They're starting to ask tougher questions.
And this is all happening just weeks into Trump's second term.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about.
It really is. So what does that tell us about the political climate at the time?
Well, I think it shows how high the stakes were.
Yeah.
Like, everyone knew this was a big deal.
Yeah.
And they couldn't just wait and see what happened. They had to act fast.
So you've got the spending freeze causing all this debate.
Right.
The media is starting to get more critical.
Hmm.
What about the Democrats?
Well, the article talks about how Chuck Schumer was really vocal in his opposition. He called the spending freeze cruel and unnecessary.
Yeah.
And he was arguing that it was really going to hurt people who rely on those government programs.
Right, like the most vulnerable people.
Exactly. But the article doesn't actually give us a direct quote from Schumer.
Really?
No, it just mentions that he was one of the Democrats who are now openly criticizing Trump.
Interesting. So we don't know the exact tone he took or anything.
Not from the article.
Okay.
But even without those details, it's pretty clear that this was a change in strategy for the Democrats.
Right. They're not holding back anymore.
No, they're coming out swinging.
And the article also mentions Tim Kaine warning federal workers about the buyout offer.
Oh, yeah. He was saying that Trump might not actually keep his promises.
Oh.
Yeah, he was questioning Trump's trustworthiness.
That's a pretty bold move.
It is. It shows how much things had changed.
From being cautious to being confrontational.
Exactly. So what do you think caused that shift?
Well, the media coverage probably played a role. But the article also suggests that maybe the Democrats misjudged how much support Trump actually had.
Right. Remember that New York Magazine piece about the young Trump supporters?
Uh-huh.
Maybe the Democrats saw that and thought, oh, wow, everyone loves Trump.
And they were afraid to criticize him.
Exactly.
But then the spending freeze happens and all this pushback starts.
And maybe they realized they had overestimated his popularity?
It's possible.
Yeah.
And then you have that Reuters Ipsos poll that the article mentions,
Right.
showing that a lot of people actually disagree with some of Trump's policies.
So it's like they were working with the wrong information.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And now they're feeling more confident in their opposition.
It makes you wonder what would have happened if they had been more assertive from the start.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thought experiment.
It is. What if they had really pushed back right away?
Could they have changed things?
We'll never know.
It's all very hypothetical.
It is. But it's fun to think about.
Yeah, for sure. This whole thing is like watching a political thriller unfold in real time.
It really is. All these shifting alliances and sudden changes.
It's only been a few weeks.
Crazy.
Okay, so we've got this initial calm,
Mm-hmm.
then the spending freeze throws everything off balance.
Uh-huh.
The media gets more critical, and the Democrats start pushing back. But where does the article say all of this is going?
Well, the author seems to think that this shift in perception could be a turning point.
Okay.
They're hoping that people will start to see the potential harm in Trump's policies
Right.
and that it will lead to more checks and balances on his power.
So they're hoping for a more limited government.
In a way, yeah. They want to see Congress and the courts putting more limits on what Trump can do.
But what about all the people who still support Trump?
Right. That's the big question.
How do we reconcile those two sides?
Well, that's a much bigger discussion.
About the whole political divide in the country.
Exactly. It's not just about specific policies anymore. It's about different worldviews.
Different ways of seeing the world.
Exactly.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about.
It has. We've talked about the spending freeze, the media's role, and the Democrats' strategy.
Yeah, and we've even touched on some bigger questions about American politics.
And we're not even done yet.
We still have more to cover.
We do. But for now, let's keep going with the article.
Okay, sounds good. We've talked about the spending freeze and how everyone reacted to it.
Right.
What else does the article point to as evidence of this shifting political tide? All right, so we're back, and we've been talking about this whole idea of a shifting political tide during Trump's second term.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, starting with that spending freeze,
Yeah.
and then the media's response, and the Democrats getting more, assertive and everything.
It's like all the pieces on the chessboard are moving around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article from Crooks and Liars that we've been looking at seems to suggest that this could be a real turning point.
Right. This idea of a new conventional wisdom.
Yeah, like maybe people are starting to see the potential harm of Trump's policies, and maybe that's going to lead to some real change.
Well, that's what the author's hoping for anyway.
Right. But of course, we have to remember that there are still plenty of people who support Trump.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's not going away anytime soon.
Nope. And it's important to keep that in mind.
Definitely.
Huh.
It's like we're looking at two different versions of reality.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And the media plays a big role in shaping those realities.
Absolutely. Like, remember that New York Magazine piece we talked about?
Yeah, the one about the young Trump supporters.
Right. They were portrayed as being cool and trendy.
Which can be a really powerful message.
Yeah, especially for politicians who are trying to figure out how to respond to Trump.
They don't want to alienate potential voters.
Right. So maybe the Democrats were initially hesitant to criticize Trump too much because they thought it would backfire.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And then you have that spending freeze and suddenly everything changes.
Yeah, it's like that was the catalyst.
Totally.
Yeah.
The media starts asking tougher questions. The Democrats get more assertive. And all these underlying tensions come bubbling up.
And don't forget about that Raiders-Sipsos poll we talked about.
Oh, yeah, that's an important one.
It showed that a lot of people actually didn't agree with Trump's policies.
Right. So maybe the perception of widespread support for Trump wasn't entirely accurate.
Exactly. And that makes you wonder what would have happened if the Democrats had been more forceful from the beginning.
It's a fascinating question.
Would they have been able to sway public opinion?
Maybe, but we'll never know.
It's all hypothetical now.
It is, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got this really complex situation with a lot of moving parts, and it's still unfolding.
Oh, yeah. This is just the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess the big question is, where do we go from here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
We've seen how quickly things can change.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
there's no telling what the future holds.
But I think one thing's for sure.
What's that?
This is going to be an interesting ride.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has.
We've learned a lot about the political landscape during Trump's second term.
And about the forces that are shaping American politics in general.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for joining me on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in.
I appreciate you.
And remember, folks, knowledge is power.
That's right.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep questioning the narratives you're presented with.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, everyone. That's it for this deep dive.
Until next time.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the topics that matter most.